Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today, we are going to be discussing the absolutely intriguing case of the silver suited soil sampler. Now, try saying that 3 times fast. Now, among all of the very strange cases that we've covered on this channel, this is a very strange case, and I'm very excited to present it today. Now, it occurred in my favorite decade of paranormal research, the 1970s, in late August of 1976 to be precise, and it occurred in North Reddish of Greater Manchester, England. Now, the witnesses in this case were 3 children, all about 10 years of age, 2 of which were a pair of twins, a boy and a girl, and then their friend, who was a boy of about the same age. They were playing on some waste ground, which was near a bunch of different landmarks, a railway line, a clubhouse for a golf course, as well as some housing and a new primary school, as well as a reservoir. So they were playing on this waste area where actually a hut had been constructed for them as a sort of playhouse. And between noon and 1, the girl went inside the little hut to prepare some orange juice. Now, as the girl was inside of the small hut preparing the orange juice, the 2 boys claimed that they noticed this flash of silver light, accompanied by a crackling noise, which came from the direction of some nearby bushes. In the original Northern UFO News report about this incident, they further described that the flash was actually this pair of flashing silver eyes, which came from the undergrowth. Now, as they were watching this thing, soon enough the eyes emerged from inside of the bush, set in a bizarre figure. Now, I'm going to put this out there that this entity was described as much more human looking than your average humanoid. The children said that he appeared to have regular human proportions, even being about the same height as the twins' father, who was 5 feet 9 inches tall. They claimed that he wore a silver one-piece suit, described by the children as looking like a tracksuit, with elastic pant cuffs, as well as silver gloves. He had several buttons at the top of the shirt, a belt, which we're going to return to in a minute here, and thick-soled black boots. The being's complexion was very pale, and one of the twins actually described the eyes as looking almost cat-like. In addition to this, he had long yellow hair and a short gray beard. Now, again, considering I've described a pretty humany humanoid, why were the kids so sure that this was some sort of bizarre entity? Well, according to the 2 boys, when he emerged from the bushes, this being was actually floating about 6 inches off the ground. They barely had time to process this fact when suddenly the being simply vanished. One of the boys described it as like a light being switched off. One moment it was there, and the next moment it was just gone. Now, inside of the little hut, the girl was completely oblivious to the fact that her 2 friends had seen this bizarre being. She was just making the little orange juice drinks, when suddenly she heard a strange rustling sound. She looked towards the direction of the sound out the window and saw the face of this stranger staring in at her. Now, where he was positioned now, right outside of the hut and looking in the window, was actually right behind the boys, who were still looking at the bush, waiting for him to come back or whatever. So they didn't see him at all staring into the hut at the girl. Now, again, initially thinking that this was just some guy, she just stared at him before he turned away and removed a small shovel that he kept at his belt, which he then used to dig up little scoops of dirt, which he then put into several plastic-looking bags, which were also attached to his belt. Now, by this point, the girl was starting to get a little uneasy with whatever this guy was doing, so she called out to her friends. The moment she called out, the being vanished. Now, much like in the Sandown Sam case, which bears a lot of similarities here to, a very bizarre humanoid entity which is encountered by children. If you want more information on that, you can check out that earlier video on my channel. The kids were not necessarily frightened of this guy. They were a little uneasy, but again, they weren't scared. So they started looking around to see if they could find it again. They walked towards a fence which surrounded the new school that had been put up, and quickly saw him right near the fence. So they stopped some yards away and just watched him. They claimed that he was stooping down by the fence, digging up more dirt, which he was then putting into these little plastic bags. The being seemed not to notice them, however, though after a while he vanished again. Only this time, the 2 twins claimed that he seemed to go down into the ground and vanish. Now, the 3 kids walked towards the area where they had seen the being vanish into the ground, and claimed that as soon as they hit that area, there was a flash of light and a strong gust of wind, and then this object rose from the earth into the sky. The children claimed that it was silver, medium-sized, whatever that means, shaped like a gently curved saucer with a flat bottom, complete with a small dome on top. Near the dome was a row of 4 dark circular holes, along with several dark areas around the rim of the object. It rose slowly and then moved off horizontally over the school. Now, the children kind of almost seemed to awaken to a sort of fright at this moment and all ran to the home of the twins' parents, where they became very, very upset about what they had just witnessed. For some time afterward, the girl refused to go out alone at night, and her brother wouldn't go outside at all unless someone accompanied him. Now, this is a phenomenally bizarre case, and there's a lot to go through just with this encounter. One of the first things that really occurs to me is how odd it is that, you have these kids going through this really weird event, and for the entire duration of the event itself, they're not really afraid of what's going on. Even if this was just some guy, again, it would have to be some guy that knows how to vanish and float 6 inches above the earth. But even if it was some guy, it would be a stranger who was behaving in an odd manner. But for, again, the entire duration, they were curious rather than afraid. It was as soon as the experience ended that it's almost like they realized how odd it was and became rather upset. And again, this kind of response to anomaly, I think, is as important as kind of witnessing the anomaly itself. Because you'll see so often where people go through these really weird events, and it's almost like they don't fully realize how out of the ordinary it is for them as they're going through it. Sometimes it leads to people just going to bed, like in my mom's case of the ghost house UFO, which you can check out that video too. Or in this case, actually seeking out, like, hey, where did that guy vanish to? Where's he going to pop up next? And then after the event is over, again, kind of realizing, oh, that was really weird. And again, the response to that varies. In the case of these kids, their response was to be rather upset and afraid about it. But it's interesting to see that kind of suspension of normal emotion throughout the duration of the anomaly. Now, this is another classic example of one of John Keel's favorite locations, garbage dumps. You have these kids playing in, a literal, like, some sort of dump or wasteland. Not only that, but it was also near a waterway, which of course has hefty ties to the paranormal across countless mythologies and belief systems, as well as a sewage area. That was pointed out by Jenny Randalls in her handling of this case. So it's like you have, a wasteland, you have a water reservoir nearby, and then you have a combo of some wastewater, which is just intriguing to see these kind of settings popping up time and time again with paranormal phenomenon. Something else that is very intriguing to me too is that for both like appearances, for both groups, the two boys and then the one girl, this being started by staring at them. Again, this is something I've really been interested in recently, just going through so many paranormal encounters where regardless of if you're dealing with a cryptid or, a ghost or some sort of UFO occupant, it seems as though oftentimes there is this kind of icon of the being staring at the witness. And again, I think that that has something to do with being both the observer and the observed. Now, in this case as well, another of my recent favorites is you have this entire experience kind of sandwiched between sightings of anomalous lights. Again, the being was preceded by this flash of silver, and then when it finally vanished and, the strange, almost UFO-looking object took off from the ground, that was also preceded by a flash of light. So at the beginning of the encounter and the end of the encounter, you have light kind of acting as this catalyst. Something very specific about this counter in particular is that the color of the light is kind of repeated throughout the encounter, silver. So, it begins with either these silver flashing eyes or silver flashing light, the silver suited man, the silver craft. It appears that it is all the same, if not substance, the same concept. I know that Paul Devereaux in Earthlights postulated that, paranormal phenomena, especially if we're talking about UFO occupants, it seems as though the occupants and the craft are almost always made out of the same material or appear to be made out of the same material. And so in this case, you have just this concept of the silver color, the flashing silver light repeating across every single angle. Now, again, for all intents and purposes, this bears all the iconography of a classic UFO occupant encounter. You have this humanoid being wearing kind of a one-piece tracksuit, very modern. Again, the sparkling silver, mechanical type vibes. A literal flying saucer-shaped object which takes off up out of the ground where the being had vanished. However, on the flip side, you also have this entity floating a few inches above the ground in honestly a very spectral fashion. In addition to that, there are so many points of this case which correlate to, the fairy faith. Not only do you have the classic, the gust of wind which precedes the object taking off, which ties into the fairy faith, who are known to, ride gusts of winds, or, that's kind of how they traveled, or it would precede their appearances, or end them. But again, in this case, you have the sample taking, which, of course, in the UFO construct, that way of looking at it, of the nuts and bolts flying saucers, people believe, oh, well, they're taking samples to take back to their home planet. However, if you look at it simply as a being digging into the earth and taking the earth, there is that connection to the earth throughout the fairy faith, including their connection to mines, simply the underground, even buried treasure. Now, on this topic as well, in this case, there's the really fascinating aspect where the kids claim that his final disappearance actually he sunk into the ground. And then immediately thereafter, this object, this craft, rose from the ground where he had vanished into the sky. Now, this is intriguing to me because fairyland, especially, is tied both to the underground as well as to the above ground, to the sky. Likewise, many other worlds of the dead, which fairyland and the dead, it's almost, it's pretty much is the same thing, iconographically speaking. Anyway, many of these other worlds encapsulate this dichotomy as well. It's kind of like as above, so below, or perhaps so below, as above. Well, if you enjoyed this episode on the silver suited soil sampler, please like, and if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may have in store. Till then, you can keep up with me on my free blog at patreon.com/justanothertinfoilhat. And for today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Doing.